Welcome. And with us today, I have Jenny Hedrick, and she is from the Super Simple Homeschool podcast. Jenny, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I remember back before I had a podcast and before I was homeschooling and I had a government job and I had 3 breaks a day and I listened to so many podcasts. Now I don't even have time to listen to my own other than when I'm editing. So I'm putting your podcast on my list though, because who doesn't want super simple homeschool? I mean,
Well,
that is
that's the
awesome. So
idea.
why don't you just start by telling us what even got you into homeschooling in the first place? Were you homeschooled yourself?
I was not. So I grew up I grew up going to a private Christian school, and I actually went to a private Christian university as well. So I went to private school K through college, and then I went to a public university for my master's, and I got a degree in social work, and I worked as a therapist for 15 years, and I still do now part-time, but about, let's see, 9 years ago, so 2015, my oldest was 3 maybe, and I was in the MLM world, and I'm no longer selling any products like that, but
Wait, what's ML?
there were a lot of multi-level marketing.
Okay.
So, like I sold essential oils.
Okay. All right. So kind of like the
You know what I'm
pyramid
talking about?
thing. Okay.
Yes,
Mary
yes,
Kay,
yep.
that sort of stuff.
Yes, all those things. So I was in that community, and what I found was there were a lot of homeschool moms in that community who were, working part-time, trying to earn some extra income and homeschooling their kids. And that was really my first exposure to homeschooling. And I really thought, what a cool thing that these moms get to do, to be home with their kids and spend all that time together. And I wasn't ready. At the time, I had 2 sons that were 3 and 2, and I just wasn't ready to launch them into the world. And granted, I still had a few years, but I couldn't even imagine letting them go out of the home so many hours of the day and the week. And so over the next couple years before my son started getting to school age, I really mulled around with the idea of how could we do this, because I was still working full time. I told my husband, I said, I think I want to homeschool. And he said, okay, I don't know how that's going to work, but, let's see if we can figure it out. And so 2 years after that, I essentially retired from my job as a therapist and stayed home. And I've been homeschooling ever since. And we're in our 8th year of homeschooling now.
So cool. I love that. So your main reason was kind of like, I'm just not ready to like unleash them into the world, which yes, like if you don't question anything, then it doesn't, it's like, yep, that's just what you do. You send them off on a bus. But It's so
Right.
funny because the school down the road from me, their bus garage is on my road. And every time I drive by, there's a huge sign saying, we need bus drivers. We need bus drivers. We'll pay good. We'll train. Da, da, da. And I'm going, well, who the heck are they going to get to drive? Like, this potentially would be my kid around. You're so desperate. Who's doing it now? Are you just like finding Bob off the corner that, has like a bicycle license to drive? Like, can you imagine my 6-year-old like getting on this bus with someone that we don't know? We don't know them. We don't trust them. And then getting them to the right place and then bringing them back. Like, it's bizarre when you step out of it. It's
Yes.
normal if like you never questioned it, but I totally
Right.
get that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it was
So,
really,
go
for
ahead.
me, it became more than that as we went through. Like,
Yeah.
this was back in 2017 when we started. And at the time I thought, I really do want to just keep my kids home so I can teach them about the Lord and about Jesus. And I wanted to really instill in them like a biblical worldview. And so that was a big motivation for me as we went on, is then seeing everything that started happening in public schools just really, was the final nail on the coffin for me. I'm like, yeah, we're staying in this life.
When you were a therapist, were you a therapist in a school?
So I wasn't. I actually did my master's practicum in a public high school, and I hated it. So I did not ever, beyond that, I never went back into the schools. But I did work with youth when I first started out. And that was really, really challenging because I was working with youth who were really at risk and had had really traumatic things happen to them. And couldn't even function in a normal society. So they were in group homes. And, when you see what is possible, and granted, that's not the school system that necessarily did that to them, but when you see what can happen to kids when, they experience trauma, whether it's in the home or somewhere outside of the home, you realize I want to give my kids the best chance to be successful in life. And for me, that was homeschool.
Yeah. And this is probably a good question for you because you have the therapist background. Okay, I'm in like where I mean I grew up more in like inner city schools, so I saw, some stuff, but we're in now the country and you think, "Oh, these would be good kids, right?" But I mean, I know people who attend the local school and I know that there are parents that have, addiction problems. I know that there are parents that have affairs. I know that there are, parents who are maybe selling something illegal. And, so it's not that the kids there are like watching their siblings get shot. Like, my friend is a teacher down in, the city where that's what she has to deal with. She's got kids that are actually seeing like a sibling get murdered. And then they're coming to school and just like, oh, okay, we're all just going to, learn how to spell cat today, you know, but even in today's day and age, I don't know if it's worse today or not, but I know we've got the social media, we've got the video games, we've got parents that are overworked and not really having the time or wherewithal to know that we need to spend quality time together as a family and talk. We have foods that are just plain not good for our kids. They've got chemicals and everything else in them affecting our behaviors. And then the parents that are just kind of like, well, this one drinks too much and this one, yeah, they're just not happy in their marriage. So it's not that these kids are necessarily seeing trauma per se, but they've got all these factors. And then you throw them all into the classroom with one teacher who is probably underpaid and under-resourced. Like, is that a recipe for just disaster? Or is this like, no, that's just life and you kind of got to get over it?
That's a really interesting way of putting it. And I think it's both, right? I mean, for some kids, the school system is the safest place for them. And, that I will just go ahead and just be honest about that. There are families that are so dysfunctional and there's so much trauma that school is a refuge and absolutely for a blessing for those children. But then, when you throw all those kids together, like you said, with one teacher, and they all have all these social needs and emotional needs, and now we're seeing such a rise in mental health, much in part to some of the things that you're talking about. And then it kind of just becomes this pool where everybody is learning how to be dysfunctional.
Yeah. And it's like, I think about it and I don't want to sound privileged, God forbid, but it's like, okay, well, school might be the safest place for these kids and I get that and they need to be there. But you know what? You're not going to do it in front of my kid. It
Yeah,
sounds terrible to say, but it's like, well, my kid's not going to be the sacrificial lamb so that your kid can see what normalcy looks like.
right. Yeah,
It's
absolutely. And for my kid, the safest place for them is at home.
Yeah. And I, it is hard. Teachers are just, they're like, I believe most teachers are very good and I want to be there and want to do what they do, but their hands are tied between, being under-resourced and having these funding or testing requirements that are all tied to funding. It really like they took away what education was supposed to be about the kid and like placed it into, the bank accounts of the administrators. So
Yeah.
your whole basis is the super simple podcast, super simple homeschool podcast. And I know you have like your Instagram page and you said that you have some books, so I'll let you like get into that, what you've created. But I think that most people are after they say like, "Oh, I couldn't afford to quit my job to stay home with the kids." The next thing is they're like, "I can't handle that. I'm not I didn't do that well in school. And, I know before I started homeschooling, I had this vision of like, oh my God, do I have to like spend every Sunday night going through that week's curriculum and like running to the store and having to buy arts and crafts and this and that, right? And I'm just like, that could
Yes.
never be me. That I can't. I can barely get dinner on the table. Well, tell us how we can overcome these hurdles and why that doesn't have to be the reality of our homeschool.
Yeah. Well, I want to address a couple things that you said. And the first is I could never afford to do that. And I think, that is a real hurdle for a lot of people. People think that they are, you know, working to, they have two household incomes. How do you get rid of one in order to stay home? And to that, I just say, if it's important enough, you figure it out. And, there have been times that we have had to completely restructure our whole life to make homeschooling work. And that's the reality. But you make time and money for what is most important to you. Also, homeschooling does not have to be complicated or expensive. And that's my biggest thing with what I'm trying to do with my podcast and my website and things is help moms figure out that, hey, it can actually be simple. Now, it's not easy. Those two words don't mean the same thing to me. It is hard. It's one of the hardest things you can do as a mom. But it doesn't have to be complicated, and you don't have to spend all your free time planning out your homeschool. There are moms who do that and do it beautifully. I am not one of those. I thought I was when I first started, and I went through so many different curriculums. I was like, okay, this one doesn't provide enough guidance. Okay, this one is too rigid and structured. And so then I would try a different one, and I just kept jumping around through curriculums. I spent so much money, and now I really don't use curriculum at all. I have one that I have started using this year because I needed a little bit more. I needed somebody to tell me just what we're doing every day because my life is chaos right now because we're trying to move. But typically, I ended up at a point where we don't even use curriculum, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You think about how did you learn something new? How did you learn how to start a podcast? Right? Like I went to a friend who had a podcast. I went on YouTube and I read blog posts and I found out that, this mic is good and this mic is not good. And if you don't want to spend $700, then get this mic. I went and I did my research. And that's how adults learn now, right? Because we have information at our fingertips. So if we can teach our kids how to do that, they can learn anything that they want to now and for the rest of their lives.
You're so right. You were so right. The curriculum thing, I think and I have the curriculum podcast, and it's really just because there are so many out there. And I think, back in the 90s and early 2000s, you had a Becca and maybe one other one. So the people that I know who were homeschooled themselves, they're like, yeah, there really wasn't that's just what you did. But now there is so much out there, and I've loved learning about each one. But I'll tell you, and I think I've had the curriculum podcast for a year now where I just do 10-minute segments each week on a different curriculum. But I still don't know that I'm doing the best one for my child, that teaching him everything I want him to know in the most funnest way possible, where he's going to retain it. And, it's like I think someone told me once, the best curriculum you can have is just one that you'll use. And they're all good in some way, right?
Yep.
But like you said, I mean, if you want to learn something, you're going to learn it anyway. So, and I think we all as parents are like, well, maybe I'll send them to school until they learn how to read and then I'll bring them home. But to that, it's like, well, come on, you're not going to be 30 years old and not know how to read if you want to read. There are so many YouTube videos or whatever that could teach you just the basics. And I think, take that pressure off. That's something that never worried me at all. And it's not like I'm from a background that's heavy in reading. I, was never a great student. My parents never read to me, but I knew that even not having any of that, I can still read. So I didn't have any fear going into teaching my child how to read, because it's like, I don't know if anybody taught me. I just know how to do it now. Probably not the best, but that's why I'm taking, let's work on phonics and this and that. And there are so many different things you can use. You're so right. You don't have to have a curriculum, but it is nice
Yeah,
when you
well,
do
and to
want just
that,
guidance.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that people use curriculum for, right? Is to help them know what to do and how to do it and, you know, just have that structure and that assurance that you're doing enough or doing the right thing, especially when you're a beginning homeschooler. That can really help you just feel secure. And so, but I do think that oftentimes we get so stuck in the curriculum, we forget that we're teaching the child, we're not teaching the curriculum. And we let that kind of, at least I did, like it would dictate, it's like, oh, I have to get this done today, or I have to finish this, lesson or this year of this book before we can move on to something else. Or it just became this thing that sort of was so confining for me. And it was like, my kids are all dyslexic. And it just became more than we would spend so much time doing all, trying to get all the things done. And then it was like, we're not having any fun. We're struggling through our days. And are we really learning anything when we all are kind of like, okay, now we got to do this next thing, you know? And so it takes so much more effort for kids with dyslexia to get through the work. And then it
So,
was just not fun anymore.
would you call yourself an unschooler other than that one curriculum you're doing?
No, actually, I would not call us that. So what we do is we do notebooking. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And I'll just put a plug in here too. That's what I create. I create notebooks for kids to use for notebooking. And so what we'll do is we will find really cool resources. And I have a structure in our day, and I do initiate the learning. So I'm not a traditional unschooler, because traditional unschool says kids will figure it out on their own and they'll learn it as they go through life, which I think there's some truth in that, but I'm not comfortable with that fully. So I pick out resources based on what I know their interests are, based on what I think is important for them to be learning. And then we use those resources. We use podcasts, YouTube, documentaries. We do textbooks, books from the library, all kinds of resources that I kind of curate for them. And then we do notebooking as a way to apply. So it's basically like a scrapbook. So when we do something like we'll listen to our favorite podcast, science podcast, then they'll create a scrapbook page about what they learned, and they'll be able to put in a summary, and then I can tailor that to their age and their ability level. So my daughter, who's 6, she will just dictate to me a couple sentences and I'll write them in her notebook. My sons will dictate to their iPads, and then we'll go in and edit for grammar, and then we'll print it out and paste it in their notebook. So we do use materials and resources, and I do kind of direct our homeschool day, but we have found a lot of freedom in kind of breaking free from the confines of a curriculum.
So your children must be exposed to other kids their age, I'm guessing.
Yes.
All right, I want to find the way to word this. There must be times where there is, especially the 6-year-old, I have a 6-year-old as well, and this is that age where they're learning to read, or, just starting to like put things together. There are going to be kids in school that are already reading, or if you have older kids that are already multiplying, and if you're not there yet, how do you, as the mom, be comfortable in the fact that you will get there and you are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing for your child at that time? That's a hard thing. It's a hard pill to swallow.
It's so, so hard. And when I first started homeschooling, so picture this, I literally, my grandparents, my cousins, my uncle, and my aunt, like they all are teachers. They're all teachers. My grandpa was a Christian school administrator, so he was a principal and an administrator for a long time. And When he found out that I was going to homeschool, the first thing he said was, how is she going to teach her children how to read? And that was like in my heart, right? Because my aunt was a reading specialist. Like, it's this idea that you need some magical skill set or you have to go to college to learn how to teach kids how to read. Then go figure, I have 3 kids with dyslexia. So it's even more of a
Yeah.
challenge. And so, in those early years, like my grandparents would come to visit and my grandpa would start quizzing my kids or like grab a book and have them sit down and read. And, it was just so, so hard. So, so hard. But what happened was I really had to get comfortable, right, with my with knowing my kid. And I had to go, like I remember being at an eye exam with my son and the doctor wanted him to like read a paragraph and he could barely get through it because he just wasn't there yet because of the dyslexia. And I remember just saying, he's dyslexic, so he might not be able to read all those words. That might not have something to do with his eyesight. And just getting really comfortable with advocating for him and standing up for my kids in those moments. And also recognizing what's most important to me. Are they making progress? And that's where I have to like rest assured that they're going at their own pace. And thank goodness we homeschool. My husband's dyslexic and didn't even know it. He was in special education reading programs his whole life in the public school, didn't really know why, but they just kind of pushed him through, graduated him, and he still struggles with a lot of things. Being able to say, okay, you know what? He didn't get the focused attention that our kids are now getting because of their dyslexia at home. And we get to see that progress and we don't have to stress if they're not at the same level as other kids their age.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine how hard that must have been with family quizzing your kids. It's like, it's like demeaning because you're saying, like, my kid's dumb because he's not answering what you're asking him. But then you're also saying I'm a bad parent because I haven't worked with him enough. Or, what do you assume that they're
Yeah.
just laying around all day doing nothing? That's got to be, I think, one of the hardest things about homeschooling is not comparing
Mhm.
yourself to their peers that are the same age in traditional school. Because I would imagine the trajectory goes like, okay, we might not be right up to quote unquote par with what they're learning in school at the very beginning because we're spending more time on play than
Yeah.
sitting down
Yep.
and memorizing what sounds a word makes. But as there's got to be a cusp where then they kind of
Mhm.
skyrocket past the kids in traditional school because they get to go after their passions and learn more about learn math through if they love four-wheeling or mechanics, like learn math through that
Right.
lens versus just it's got to be done from this workbook like this, memorize it now.
Yes,
Yeah, that's got to be
exactly.
hard. And what are the ages of your kids right now? I'm sorry, you may have already said it.
I didn't. So my oldest is 12 and he just started the 6th grade. Technically, I mean, we are part of an enrichment program, and so that's his grade level. Then my middle son is 10, and so he's in the 5th grade, and then my daughter is 6 and in the 1st grade. So that's my age spread. And this has been a new challenge this year because in our enrichment program, my son entered middle school and a lot more is being required of him. And it's really stretched me again, kind of like when I first started and I felt like, man, I don't know, am I good enough? Am I doing enough? And now kind of going through that same process of realizing like it's okay. There's a lot of kids that are, further than he is. But in the grand scheme of life, it all kind of levels out. Like we all reach adulthood, right? We all can get a high school diploma, right? And we then get to pursue our own passion or our own calling. And it doesn't matter if we learned to read when we were 6 or 12. It doesn't matter if we made math all the way up through calculus or stopped after algebra. None of that matters when you hit adulthood. And we're all going to get there. And the learning doesn't stop at 18. And I think that was a really big mindset shift for me, because initially I was like, I got to make sure they learn all these things and they know all these things by the time they finish high school. I was like, why? I don't remember half of the stuff I learned. Probably more than half of the stuff I learned growing up. And I'm relearning things now because now I'm interested. Now I care. Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's like now I'm relearning all the things that I supposedly learned back in middle school and high school, but I actually care about it. So I'm remembering it and I'm retaining it.
Yeah. And just little things like, for instance, this morning, my son was like, well, I forgot how to write an F. And I said, well, out how to write an F. If you know that we have letters somewhere in this house and you can pick out an F, go there, figure out which one it is and copy it. So it's like teaching them how to figure out how to get the answer is so much more valuable than making sure they memorize the answer. Because like you said, like, I don't remember any of this math that I learned in school. I don't remember, like, I don't know if I took trigonometry, but there you go. I don't even know if I took it. Probably not, but I know the words. So like I could have, it could have been a whole year I forgot about, but it's, can you figure out how to find the answer that you need? Well, if you're going to start a podcast, how do you figure out how to learn, how to do that? So you go on the YouTube, you read the books, but yeah. So then he went into the other room where we had the alphabet up on the wall and sang the alphabet till he got to F, and okay, here it is. So it's like that sort of teaching is so much more valuable.
Yeah.
And can you just tell me, like, what does your day look like? You mentioned an enrichment program. So if you want to kind of talk about what that is, and then just tell us what your day does look like, or even, each week, because day to day is obviously going to vary a little bit, but what does it sort of resemble for people that don't homeschool yet and maybe are thinking that this could be their path?
Yeah. So we have an enrichment program, like I said. Now, there are multiple kinds of enrichment programs, some through the public schools, but ours is private. So it's 1 day a week, and the kids go and they get, a certain number of subjects. And so, ours is structured one way, but there's lots of different ways it can be. Right now in elementary school, my kids get all kind of the electives. They get art and music, and they do science experiments and things like that. And then, so that's our Thursday. And then Monday through Wednesday for us, we do our typical school work. And that looks like, we start with some reading from the Bible, maybe a read aloud. We just kind of like get in the mode slowly after breakfast. And then we do our, like I said, right now we are using a curriculum. I'm going to talk about that on your other podcast. But, we just kind of go through that, and we take a break mid-morning to do some more read aloud time and have some tea. And then we finish up our independent work. So my 2 boys are oldest. They're old enough to do independent work. And so we have kind of like a couple hours at the end of the morning, like from 10 until noon, where they have a list of things that they need to accomplish for school. And I'm around to kind of help with them as needed. But how we start that time is I work with my 6-year-old on her reading and her math. And then she's done for the day. And then they come and, get help from me as they need it. So in the morning, that first part of the morning, that's when we get like our core subjects done together. We do family style for science, for history, for geography, for all those content subjects, we do all together. But we usually only do one a day. We usually do one of those a day. And so we do that Monday through Wednesday. Then Thursday, they go to their enrichment program. And then Friday, we typically do, like, we have our hiking group that goes 2 Fridays a month, and we go hiking. We live in Colorado, so there's no shortage of beautiful hikes. And then on the other Fridays, we try to get together with friends, or we do a field trip or something more hands-on on Fridays. But usually by that time, we're kind of over book work. So
yeah,
that's our free day.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think that sums it up beautifully. So like, you say you're doing history. You might just do history on Mondays. Wow.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So we, instead of trying to do like history, science, geography all in one day, we just loop through those. So, we'll start our day together and we'll do our core subject for the day. And like I said, it's different every day. But what I quickly learned early on homeschooling was that if I tried to do all the subjects in every day, we just get burned out. And part of that is because my kids, even the older ones, still need very specific reading instruction and very specific one-on-one language arts and math. And so I would just get so exhausted if I was trying to do all of that one-on-one time with them and try to do all the other subjects. So I've learned over the years that we have to be done by lunch. We're not getting anything done after lunch. So that's how we do it. We just do one main core subject a day.
Okay. But now, did you say math you'll do every day?
Math and reading we do every day.
Okay.
But it's like
that's more their
the content
independent work.
subjects. Yep, yep.
Okay.
And so they'll do that either independently or one-on-one with me, depending on what their needs are on that day. But as far as content subjects go, those subjects don't require like, right? It's not like it doesn't build on itself, right? Like it can be kind of isolated. It's okay if you go a week without doing history, you're not going to forget everything you've learned. But like with math and reading, you want it to be consistent. So,
okay, well that makes a lot of sense. I think that also takes like the pressure off of thinking of this busy, hectic, like, and then there's always something that we drop because it's like, all right, well, we got to be to the play date by noon, or, I have to do the podcast, so I have to get you to grandparents for noon. And so which one are we going to throw out the window today? All right, we won't do reading. We won't do, the science. We won't do. So it almost just feels more calm when you're like, well, we have 3 hours to learn about history. We can read some books. We can watch a documentary. We can do all of that. And that's really just where your mind is focused. So I do like that. Now, are they finishing up the reading and math before lunch too? So then lunchtime comes and then they're free to just have fun?
Typically, yes. So that is always the goal. And so I try to structure our day to that. Some days if we start really late because kids slept in or we just got a slow morning, then I'll just say, okay, let's just do your independent work today. And the independent work for my older kids is typing. They have a video spelling program that they do, and then they do like some copy work, and then they do their math and reading, often with me there to help. And so some days that's all we do, and they can kind of do a lot of that on their own. And some days we're able to get in another subject. Most days we're able to get in another subject as well. And that's what we would start with and then move into the independent work after that.
Yeah. And so it is hard though, because I mean, you're called super simple homeschool, but then like in New York, we have a lot of reporting requirements, and it doesn't necessarily say you have to spend this many hours on this subject, but it does say you have to have the equivalent of 900 hours in the year. But I'm trying to think, like, when you talk about things like typing and, there's writing and there's reading and there's also like, I think ours is broken up into reading, writing, spelling, and English as 4 different subjects they want us to do to report on. And then there's history, and there's science, and there's math, and then there's art and gym. I mean, that can easily be, music, typing, stuff. So it's like there seems to be endless subjects you can do. How do you make it super simple, but so that you're not gypping your child either? And you're fulfilling the requirements that your state wants.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's important, and I don't know New York specifically, but in Colorado, we do have like a list of subjects that need to be taught. But if you go in and you look at the statute, it doesn't specify that they have to be taught every day, that they have to be taught even every grade. Like, we have to teach civics to our kids, which I always find a little ironic because I don't think they're really teaching civics in the public school.
Yeah.
But
well, here's something funny. We have patriotism that we're supposed to teach. And I'm like, they aren't learning this.
No, definitely not. So, so there's that, but if you look closer, they don't need to have that until the 7th grade. And so, there are things that they specify, you have to have it by the time they finish high school or you have to have a little bit every year. I think you're supposed to teach flag etiquette every other year in Colorado, which I just find really weird. But we
Flag
do like
etiquette?
this flag etiquette, like how to handle the American flag. And so we have a YouTube video that we watch every other year on how to handle the American flag. Like not that big
Like
of a
how not
deal.
to like burn it, or if it's torn, you are
You're not
supposed to
supposed
burn
to,
it.
I don't even, to be honest, I don't even know. But there's like the thing about how you can't let it touch the ground and how you fold it and all those things. So, yeah, and how you're supposed to care for it. So I know, ironic, right? Because you don't see public school kids walking around with that
No.
knowledge.
No.
But one of the things that I think is really important to remember again is that it doesn't have to be all every day. And so like looping is for me is one of the ways to keep things simple is looping. So I kind of write down like what are the subjects that I can loop, and what that means just kind of like going through them, like daily, like one a day, and then just kind of loop through. And the other thing you could do is you could do like we're going to take a month, like we're going to take the next 2 weeks to learn about the election process, right? I mean, like we're in it, we're there, it's relevant. And so, that's civics right now. And, it's going to be that's going to be our focus for 2 weeks. You can do that same thing with history. You could say, we're going to learn about the Titanic, or we're going to learn about the Civil War, and we're going to do that for this month. And we're just going to do that, right? I mean, there's nothing that says you can't take a break from science for a month. Just do history for that month, and then do a month of this topic in science. Like it's totally okay to, I mean, unless your state specifically says you have to do all of these subjects all of the time, you can still keep it simple on yourself by just focusing on one at a time, whether that's one a day or one for a month. I mean,
Yeah,
who
I think
says?
New York is one of the most strict states, and it doesn't say you
I
have
believe
to
that.
spend, out of the 900 hours in the year, you have to spend 220 math or anything like that. And yeah, we're doing right now a unit study, which I really like those kind of
Mm-hmm.
curriculums where it's
Mm-hmm.
not the full year, but it's just for nature study for autumn. It incorporates the handwriting and the reading and the English and spelling, I suppose. And it incorporates art and music and science and, all this stuff. So you're getting, it might take me 30 minutes to do the nature study with him, or maybe if we add on, the hike that with it and to, look for this and that, stuff like that. But 30 minutes to an hour to do it, but he's getting multiple subjects, that he gets credit for doing just that. So that's probably a very simple way to do it as well too.
Yeah, I think that's key, right? Like to figuring out, okay, can I overlap some things? Can I do one thing that's going to meet multiple requirements? And there's so much you can do with that in school as well.
Awesome. All right. So as we round out now, can you tell us a little bit more? You said that you have written books. Do you want to tell us about them and where people can find you? And I'll
Yeah.
link everything
So,
in the show's
of
description as well.
course. Of course. So I have my podcast, which is the Super Simple Homeschool Podcast, and it's on all the major platforms. And I also am on Instagram at my Super Simple Homeschool. And then I have a website, shocking, supersimplehomeschool.net. That's the key on that one. But on my website, I also create notebooks for kids to use for notebooking. And my kids helped me design them. And they're actually ordered through Amazon, but the links are all on my website. They have beautiful covers and they're really fun. So check those out as well. And I do have a homeschooling course for people that are just getting started with homeschooling to help people kind of get started and to learn all the ways that I keep homeschooling super simple.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely check out that Instagram page too. There's lots of great tips on there and the website. I love the idea of the notebooking. We do that with our nature study, and it's not in anything fancy. So I'm sure he'd like to have something a little bit more, jazzy to show off. But it's like that nice little yearbook at the end of the year too, where you're like, look
Yes,
where we started, look where we ended, look at all that we did, because the year goes by so fast, but you do forget all those little things. So
you do.
it has been awesome to have that. And so that when your family comes over and quizzes your kid and says, what do you do all day? They don't know anything. You're like, look at my notebook. Yes, we do.
Exactly.
So, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. I
Thank
love it. I
you. It's
love
been
this
so
idea.
fun.
What a great concept.
Thank you.